Looks like you're there.
I am here. Are we the only two so far?
So far. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, I'm going to shut the door so it doesn't come through on this one.
Okay.
Ah, Ray and Penny. Hi, Penny.
I'm supposed to have audio.
You have it.
You.
Happy New Year.
I'm supposed to have audio? Do I have
Yes.
audio? No?
Can you hear
We
us?
can you hear us?
Did he turn it down or something? I don't know his computer.
Well, we go.
I don't know why. I don't know why I don't have audio.
You can't hear us, I take it?
I'll keep saying things to Penny. Yeah.
Mitch to Penny, can you read? Over. Hi, Danita.
Okay.
Now can you hear us?
7. The surge in COVID cases is shutting down schools.
I can hear everybody now. Ray just had it turned down low.
Oh, okay. So, how are you doing?
Good.
How are your travels?
Dog. Here's the dog. Go dog.
For the helpers.
We spent New Year's with a dog just like that one.
Yeah.
And to offer more support to a
Why am I getting?
and a UConn professor plays an important role in an out of this world mission. Historic discoveries he's hoping to make millions of miles from Earth. It's time for NBC Connect News at 7.
One.
Oh, gee. How you doing?
Hi, Mitch.
This week. Tomorrow. In fact, at some of the schools are closed.
Carol,
Here I am.
it's good to see you.
After reading what you learned last week, I think I'm going to be at sea, but I'll do my best.
Oh, you'll do fine. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling better. It's been my back that was very, very sore, but it's not perfect, but it's much better.
The other thing, we actually did not meet last week. So,
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, so the notes and stuff I sent out was an additional video if people wanted to watch it. I hadn't planned on showing it to the group.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear.
So I think you're caught up, and everything has been posted.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to get some paper.
Oh, Denise coming back.
Yeah, she went to get some paper.
I'm right. I take notes. Okay.
So I just got a text from Janet. She's not going to be able to join us. Right, and here's David.
Hello.
Hello, David.
Hey, hi.
How are things in Rochester?
Happy New Year. Good.
Happy New Year.
Cold. It's like 18 degrees here.
Yep, same here.
Oh, yeah?
I think it's 20 something.
You're down there in the tropics compared to here, you know?
We should be.
Hey, Ray and Penny. Happy New Year.
We were supposed to get snow today. Apparently it snowed 6 inches or something in Washington, D.C.
Oh.
But Emily's
1 or 2.
Hi,
Hi,
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
We got 1 or 2 inches here, but stayed cold.
There's Suzanne.
Hey, there's Carol.
Hey, Carol.
Hi.
How are you?
How you feeling?
Doing good.
How's your back?
Oh, good.
Back feeling a little better?
Yes, yes.
Good. Good.
I was actually out today,
Hmm.
so it's good.
Oh, good.
Hey, there's Dale.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Dale.
Hi, Dale.
Well, Happy New Year to one and all.
Happy New Year.
Yes.
Well, let's see. I guess today is Mary and I were discussing it this morning. I think it's the 9th day of Christmas.
Oh,
One.
I reconsidered that, and it is the 8th day of Christmas.
Oh,
And I-
okay,
It's 8 Lords the Leaping.
right.
8 Lords Leaping.
Yeah.
8 Lords of Leaping, okay.
So you start the day after Christmas.
Just made the puzzle.
This
Okay,
is a Saturday.
No, it's
Okay.
I think it's 8 maids milking.
Yeah.
Oh,
10 lords a leaping. Made the puzzle. That's why
the
my
leaping.
sister and I and Emily just made the puzzle. I think
Oh, okay.
so it's we're up to the milkmaids. It's 8 milks and maids and milking.
Watch one.
Okay.
Okay.
Right,
All right, I'm gonna go. So you
Okay.
can.
All right.
Whatever.
Yeah. I've been on my treadmill and exercised every day since Saturday. That means I've exercised every day this year.
Oh, good.
And there's one in every crowd.
Hey.
I figured you get enough exercise up there shoveling snow.
Yeah.
You know, I've hired a guy to plow it when it gets more than 3 or 4 inches, but I still have to plow in front of the garage. I mean, shovel in front of the garage. Yeah.
Okay. So where we are right now, if you were in your notes, we're on page 30, which is lecture 10 of Professor Cohen's Hebrew Bible course. It's the Revelation at Sinai. And I also wanted to suggest that I should have said this in the email, but if you get your Jewish study Bibles and make a note, or you might want to get 2 bookmarks and put one bookmark on page 150 and put the other one on page 376. So, because what those are, and we'll discuss them both as time goes on here in the class. But one is the 10 Commandments Decalogue as is recorded in Exodus, and then the other one is Deuteronomy. And the one in Deuteronomy on 376 even has a handy dandy table where they actually tell you which traditions identify which commandments by what number. So, because everybody's got to do it their own way. So,
some nice Connecticut college student left me nice bookmarks.
Oh,
Page 376.
Yep. Well, they use that book for their the religious studies class.
They didn't take all the little note things out, so I've got some ways, some little cheat things here.
Okay. So the other thing is that so during the last lecture there was some mention made of there's the E text along with the D and P and the my mind's slipping me now, J text. So I did send out both the transcript and I had posted the lecture, which is Professor Hayes' lecture, where she goes into a lot of detail on the different texts and documentary hypothesis. And so that's on the church website if people want to watch that. If people feel that it's something we should do for the whole class, I'd be happy to do that. I don't have a particular deadline we have to be done. So anyways, that stuff is available to you if you have any questions. We will get in eventually in a couple of classes down the line when we talk Deuteronomy. There is the D text, which is Deuteronomy. So we'll talk to that later.
Mitch, what was the other page? You said it was 150, and what was the other page for the Ten Commandments?
76.
76.
376. That was close. 377.
Yeah, this is it's Deuteronomy. If you have something different than the JSB, it's Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 9, starting with verse 9. And the other one is Exodus chapter 20.
Oh, I must have something very different because my page 150 is in Leviticus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you probably have a different edition. So anyways, if so what you want is Exodus chapter 20.
That's on the Hebrew book, it's 151. I think.
Well, some of mine's on 150. I have stuff on 150.
Yeah.
For verse 20?
No, actually it's chapter 20 and it's I'm sorry, it's 148.
Yeah,
starts at 148.
Right.
Yeah, okay, it starts on 148.
Yeah.
Starts at 148. And it's chapter 20 in Exodus. And then the other one is Deuteronomy, which for the Jewish Study Bible is page Deuteronomy chapter 5. And it's starts on page 374. Okay.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy, what chapter?
Chapter 5.
Yeah, mine's very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw yours.
I must have the one with the very small print.
Yeah. But the chapters are the same regardless of the edition you have. Chapter Exodus and Deuteronomy.
That'll be good.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So, because one of the things we'll talk about as we go along is that there are different, you will see it in Deuteronomy versus Exodus, the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments are different, and a particular interest is the reason for keeping the Sabbath. And one, it's because of God created the world. The other one, it's because God took them and saved them from the Egyptians. So really, that's the two reasons, if you will. They're not contradictory, but they're two reasons that Professor Cohen talked about the two themes in the Bible, that on the Hebrew Bible are, one is that God is the creator God, and two is that God is active in history. So again, those are not mutually exclusive views of God. It's just two different views. You know, why you should listen to this God. So tonight we're going to continue on with Exodus with Professor Cohen, and he'll be talking about the Ten Commandments and focusing on Exodus 20. And he'll also mention Deuteronomy 5. So if there are any questions, I do not, right now I haven't planned any time off for ourselves, but if time goes on, such as Holy Week or something, and people want to take a break, feel free to let me know. That's right, Diane Hansen isn't here. I don't see her.
Oh.
Yeah, she's usually on time. So. And Janet Knox is not feeling well.
Oh, sorry.
So hopefully it's nothing serious. Okay, so I'm going to mute folks and see if I remember how to share my screen. It's amazing what you forget how to do. You know?
Yeah.
Share screen. Share screen.
Okay, so we're still working our way through the narratives of the Torah. So last time we spoke about the Exodus from Egypt. The Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt because of the wicked Pharaoh. He enslaved them. The Israelites did not build the pyramids, right? That's one takeaway from last week's lecture. So Israelites are enslaved, and then they are redeemed through a display of divine power, right? The mighty acts of God. Culminating in the death of the firstborn, and then culminating even further spectacular climax with the splitting of the Red Sea. So that's where we are. So Israelites are now in the desert on the other side of the Red Sea, and they're about to begin what will become a very slow trek to the land of Canaan. And that's the master narrative. The Torah, however, throws all kinds of things in our direction, so we're distracted from the story. We'll talk about that next time. But in the meantime, here we are still at the story. So the passage of the Red Sea certainly is climactic, right? That's the movie Ten Commandments has that terrific scene, right, of the splitting of the Red Sea. But the other climax, yet another climax, is this Israelites standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, where they receive the Ten Commandments in a spectacular display again of divine power, with pillar and smoke and lightning and thunder and all sorts of sound effects. Accompanying that, the Israelites received the Ten Commandments, and this is to seal the deal, the covenantal relationship between God and Israel, sealed via the Ten Commandments. So let's talk about the Ten Commandments. First point, you should know the Ten Commandments is a phrase that does not appear anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, it is I don't know where it comes from actually, phrase Ten Commandments. I think it might come from Philo. But it's not in the Hebrew Bible. Philo. He's that Jewish philosopher of the first century. Right, writes in Greek, lives in Alexandria. Contemporary of Paul. That's Philo. Okay, back to where I am. So I think he uses the phrase Ten Commandments, and he may be the first. Anyway, we call it the Decalogue, which is more accurate. That means the 10 words, or perhaps 10 divine revelations. And here I gave you the passages on the handout where you can look it up, where that phrase is biblical, right? That God has revealed 10 things, 10 words, 10 revelations, 10 acts of speech, not sure how to translate it exactly, to the people of Israel. So the text has the number 10. Right? The one thing you can do in section on Wednesday is go through the Ten Commandments and see if you can find 10. Answer, not easy. Okay, so what's going on in the 10 words, the Decalogue? So we all understand that this establishes the covenantal relationship between God and Israel, and that's why the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, begins with, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Meaning, I am the boss. I own you. I am in charge here. Right? The suzerain, the king, the superior party to this contract, sets out his credentials and then sets out his demands. Excuse me. And the other party, the inferior party, says, yes. That's the logical structure of the Ten Commandments. And Kugel talks about this, that this is illuminated by numerous treaties of the ancient Near East, where the superior party more or less has the same logical structure in a treaty or a contract with an inferior party. So, God is the suzerain, Israel is the vassal, or the inferior party, excuse me. There we go. The prologue to the Ten Commandments, which is Israel in Exodus chapter 20, the prologue is in Exodus chapter 19, which is a beautiful chapter, really filled with these poetic turns of language, elevated kind of language, including this paean of praise in chapter 19, verses 1 to 6, about Israel's specialness before God. Sometimes called the chosen people theology, wherein God selected Israel out of all the nations to receive the Ten Commandments. Why the Decalogue, the special covenantal relationship between God and humanity, is between God and the people of Israel. Why is that? Well, the text doesn't really go there, except to say that the Israelites are special before God because they received the Ten Commandments, or because they're special, they received the Ten Commandments, or because they received the Ten Commandments, therefore they're special. Some combination like that. And the rhetoric of chapter rhetoric there will remind us of the rhetoric of the Book of Deuteronomy, which we will talk about in due course. So just file this away, and we'll come back to this when we talk about the book of Deuteronomy. So we have these Ten Commandments, which serve as the covenantal glue between God and Israel. I took you out of the land of Egypt. You do what I say. The Israelites accept the covenantal subordination to God. The obvious question is, are these in fact, these 10, are they special? Does the Torah have more than 10 commandments? That's a no-brainer, class. Does the Torah have more than 10 commandments? Yes. The Torah has gazillion commandments. Thou shalt this, thou shalt not that. We haven't seen much of that because the book of Genesis has virtually none. Footnote, except for the circumcision thing and not eating the sciatic nerve. The book of Genesis otherwise has none. And in Exodus, we didn't see any commandments until we get to chapter 12, all that ritual instruction about Passover. But trust me, very soon we're going to start to be inundated with commandments of all kinds. Thou shalt this, thou shalt not that. Or if such and such, then thou shalt this. Or if such and such, then thou shalt not that. Right? The Torah is full of these. How many does the Torah have?
613.
613. Why? Where does that strange number come from?
Well, they say that 611, so the word Torah spells out 611, and then the first two commandments, I'm the Lord your God, and you shall not worship idols, were given directly to the people by Moses, and then the other 611 were written out by Moses.
Excellent. You clearly went to a good Hebrew school, so your parents got their money's worth from tuition, right? Happy to say. Where does the number 613 come from? I would say it's a very odd number. So this is how the rabbis calculate the number of commandments in the Torah. The rabbis say, in what I think is a fit of homily, it wasn't meant to be taken seriously, although the medieval Jews took it very seriously and spent endless discussion, endless hours trying to figure out exactly which are the 613. But the rabbis, I think, in a homiletical fit, said there are 613. 248 positive and 365 negative. Positive means thou shalt, negative means thou shalt not. Okay, where did those numbers come from, you ask? Well, 365 is the solar year, but I thought the rabbis have a lunar calendar. All right, so I'm a little confused. And then 248, where's 248 come from? The rabbis think there are 248 limbs in the human body. So each limb in the body can be a form of expression of subservience to God. I said, that's not a sermon. I don't know what a sermon is. But anyway, so 248 plus 365, each limb of the body, each day of the year, equals 613. My point here simply is that there are way more than 10 in the Torah. Whether you're a rabbi or not, or a Jew or a Christian, and just read the text and they come piling up. Frankly, even the 10 Commandments are more than 10, as you'll see. It requires a certain amount of reduction to get to 10. So why these 10? Why all the fuss? Why all the hullabaloo about these 10? Why the sound and light show? Answer, the text nowhere explains this. I think the question jumps out at you, what's special about these 10? And all of us immediately will start to say things like, oh, these are the fundamental, these are the basis, these are, provide the structure. We'll come up with that immediately, which is fine, nothing wrong with that, except to say that now we are in the land of interpretation. Because the text itself nowhere explains why these are the 10 fundamental, if indeed that's the right word, laws. Later interpreters will have a lot of fun trying to explain why these 10. Right? A very common explanation is that these 10 are meant to be rubrics. These are categories. And under each of these 10 will splay out all the numerous details found throughout the rest of the Torah. Philo says that. That's aforementioned Jewish Greek philosopher of the 1st century CE. So therefore they're significant because they are master categories. Okay, to which I respond, maybe. Yeah, it's possible. I'm not convinced, especially because some of them you really have to work hard to get them to fit, which is always a sign that it's not working terribly well. But at the end of the day, the Torah does not see fit to explain this, simply the fact that these are the commandments that come unintermediated, directly from God to the people of Israel, in this fury and light and thunder and cloud and smoke and everything else, whereas the other commandments do not. The other commandments come to Israel usually via Moses. God speaks to Moses, Moses turns around and then repeats them to the people of Israel. Whereas these come straight. Well, I don't know if all of them do. The text is a little confusing about all of them do. But anyway, in theory, they all come straight from God. All the people of Israel, all 603,000 people heard the revelation. 603,000 adult males heard the revelation. In the Ten Commandments, we have laws that are common to most human societies. The obvious ones are prohibition of murder, theft, adultery. Different societies will define these terms in different ways, to be sure, but it is very common in human civilized societies that there are such prohibitions. Similarly, a commandment to honor one's parents. Footnote, usually it's parents who write these laws. So there's a commandment to honor your parents. If children wrote the laws, there would be a commandment to love your children. But there is no such commandment. Anyway, back to where I am. So in human societies, the grown-ups write the laws, so of course they demand that you honor your parents and you honor your elders. So these commandments you find everywhere in human society, from the Aleuts to the Zulus, everybody in between, right? You can find commandments such as these. But the Ten Commandments also has laws that are uniquely Israelite, and I would say this applies to the laws of the Torah in general. Some of them are typical, as we'll see, typical laws, whereas others are uniquely Israelite. So the Ten Commandments, the two that are uniquely Israelite are the prohibition of worshiping any god other than God, other than the Lord, other than YHWH. That is a quintessentially Israelite prohibition. You may worship only the Lord, have no other gods before me. And the other one is the Sabbath. Scholars have labored long and hard to find some ancient Near Eastern analog to the Sabbath, and they're analogs at best. Parallels, no. Exactly the same thing, for sure not. So this notion of the Sabbath, a day off every seventh day, seems to be an Israelite invention, or Israelite contribution, or Israelite specific. And you should be happy, class, because that's where we get weekends. Comes out of the Decalogue. Without the Israelites, you would not have a weekend. You think I'm funny. I'm being serious. This is an Israelite, then Jewish, then Christian, then Western idea. Okay, a small footnote. Thou shalt not kill is usually translated, but that's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says, thou shalt not murder. I'm not sure exactly what murder means. We can sit around and try to define what exactly is murder, but it is not a prohibition of killing, it is a prohibition of murder. Similarly, what does adultery mean? Different societies will define adultery in different terms. Okay, we can argue about that too, but all these things require interpretation. Okay, next point on this about these laws. This distinction between laws that are common and laws that are Israelite specific, by the time you get to medieval philosophers, they turn that distinction into a distinction between laws that are rational or laws that are revelatory. Namely, some laws, any human being sitting around and thinking, well, any human being who's a philosopher, sit around and thinking will come up with these laws. They're perfectly rational. So say the medieval philosophers, right? The prohibition of theft is a rational prohibition. You might argue with that, but they thought it was. Prohibition of adultery is they thought, a completely rational prohibition. I don't need God in a sound and light show to tell me that adultery is prohibited. But I do need God in a sound and light show to tell me that I need to worship the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath. Those are the laws of revelation, revelatory laws. The interesting thing here, again, is that the Torah does not make these distinctions. The Torah does not classify its laws. The Torah does not tell you, well, these laws are of type X, these laws are of type Y, and these are of type Z. The Torah does not say, here are the laws that I would call ritual laws. And here are laws that we might call civil laws. And here are laws we might call criminal laws. And here are laws that we might call ethics or morality. And here are laws that we might call religious laws. No. We have these categories in our head, and we, of course, read through the Torah and immediately classify things that we find. But the Torah does not do that. And the Ten Commandments, beginning with the Ten Commandments, it all comes as a mumble jumble. So honor your father and mother, observe the Sabbath day, they're right next to each other. We'll see that most spectacularly when we get to Leviticus 19, which a text that modern Bible scholars attribute to P, or, here's a new one, class, H. We'll discuss that in due time. Right, where again you find the most wonderful laws, including thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself, which is in Leviticus 19, alongside laws that you and I would say, are not just ritualistic, but they're really pedantic and technical. What are they doing here? Point simply is, we classify the laws, the Torah does not. That makes it harder for us to interpret them. We have in the Torah at least two different versions of the Decalogue. First one is in Exodus 20, which is where it belongs from a narrative point of view. The Israelites have left Egypt, right? The spectacular display of divine power. They wander in the desert for a few days, and they come to the foot of Mount Sinai, which is what it's called in Exodus. In Deuteronomy, it's called Chorev. Back to where we are. They come to the foot of Sinai, and that's where they receive. Moses comes down with the Ten Commandments, with the Decalogue, and a spectacular display of divine power. So that's where it belongs from a story point of view. However, there's a second version of the Decalogue in the Book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy we will read in a couple of weeks. So Deuteronomy is Moses speaking. Moses giving a retrospective farewell discourse, or actually a bunch of discourses, one after another, which Moses is about to retire, that is to say, die, right? And Moses has some final parting thoughts for the people of Israel. And in that, he gives a retrospective about his life and career. And along the way, near the beginning of one of these discourses, he then reminds the Israelites about what happened on that day when they beheld the spectacular power of God, and the heavens rumbled, and here came the 10 words. So there in Deuteronomy, we have a reprise of the 10 Commandments. Now, class, is the version of Deuteronomy exactly the same as the version in the book of Exodus? This should be a no-brainer, class. Is the version in Deuteronomy the same as the version in the book of Exodus?
No.
No. Is it almost the same? Yeah, but it's not exactly the same. Now, this should bother us. Especially Moses, doesn't Moses remember the 10 Commandments? I mean, Moses, please, it's the 10 Commandments. Right, you can't get the 10 Commandments straight? Why does it change from Exodus to Deuteronomy? Well, if you are a traditionalist, then you would say, well, Moses, these are not different conflicting versions of the story, rather they're different aspects of the 10 Commandments. Or the way the rabbis say it in a particularly pithy comment, when the commandment to observe the Sabbath and the commandment to remember the Sabbath were given at one moment. That is to say, a human being cannot say two different things at one time. You can talk fast, you can mumble, you can sing, but you can't say two different words at the same time. God can. So when God said, remember the Sabbath day in Exodus, or observe the Sabbath day in Deuteronomy, he said both at the same time. You say that's impossible? Okay. If you don't like that explanation, and you are a traditionalist, I'm not sure what else you can say. But for modern Bible scholars, of course, it's obvious that we have here a slightly edited version of the book of the 10 Commandments, right? And most Bible scholars would agree that the 10 Commandments has a long and complicated evolutionary history. It begins shorter, and it gets longer, and it gets longer, and it gets longer. And the one we have in Exodus, one in Deuteronomy, represent two different culminations of this editorial process. The difference is most evident in the Sabbath commandment, where the reason for the Sabbath commandment is different. In Exodus, the reason for the Sabbath commandment is because God created the world in 7 days. And in Deuteronomy, the reason is because God took you out of the land of Egypt. Read them carefully. You'll see. According to some Bible scholars, Exodus 34 contains yet another completely different version of the 10 Commandments. Here to look ahead to Wednesday. Here's the story. Moses and the Israelites are at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai. Lightning, thunder, spectacular display, right? And the God comes out, Charlton Heston, I am the Lord, right? That whole spectacular scene, right? Etc. And then Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue. If you haven't seen the movie, The 10 Commandments, I endorse Professor Manuelian's remark. It's a hoot. It's a campy movie. It's unbelievable. It's terrific. It's Hollywood special effects 1956 at its absolute best. Anyway, so Charlton Heston comes down the mountain with the 10 Commandments. What happens when Charlton Heston comes down the mountain with the 10 Commandments? Is he happy with what he sees, class? No, he's very unhappy. The Israelites are very bad, very, very bad. Right, I'll talk about this on Wednesday. Right, so he hurls down the 10 Commandments, smashes them. Then we have some going on, which I'll skip at the moment, and then ultimately he gets to write another set of commandments. And it sure looks like Exodus 34 is that second version of the 10 Commandments. So many modern Bible scholars have argued that this is not simply more laws, it's meant to be the new second set of the 10 Commandments. And the problem with that is it doesn't look at all like the first version. So I'm not sure what to do with this. I'm not sure what the latest thinking is on this subject of Exodus 34, but I'm willing to say, have a look at it and see what you think. Okay, so I'm simply doing due diligence, right? Exodus 34, modern Bible scholars suggest that's the version in the narratives framework. That's the second version of the Ten Commandments. And outside the narrative framework, perhaps it was a different version, a different conception by a different writer of a different school about what were the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. Okay, something else you'll do in section, I hope, is to read through the Ten Commandments and try to find 10. The problem is that for any natural reading of the text, there are way more than 10. You have to pare down to get 10. So typical Jewish readers make things worse by saying that I am the Lord your God is a commandment. To which I would respectfully respond, that's not a commandment. I am the Lord your God is a prologue. It's a preface. It's a statement of power, a statement of credentials. It's not a commandment. Yeah, I know. But Jewish philosophers argued that it was a commandment. So they add to the trouble by adding yet another commandment, so make it harder to find 10. Christians typically split you shall not covet into 2 commandments, which also, I think, doesn't make too much sense, but they do, and that adds again to the number for Christians to have to worry about, since they're counting those 2 as commandments. Anyway, this is a fun exercise to find the 10 commandments. Who can find 10 in the 10 commandments? That's something you should do in section, and then there are good notes in the JSB. Back to the narrative frame. So the Israelites leave Egypt. They come to the foot of Mount Sinai. We have this display of divine power. The 10 Commandments, 10 words are revealed. Moses comes down from Mount Sinai. Moses is about to come down from Mount Sinai. He's still up there on the mountain. But all of a sudden, the text sort of, dare I say it, loses track of the forward momentum of the story. And we now start to get a whole series of blocks of material which interfere with the ongoing narrative. And right after the Ten Commandments, we have this block of material that modern scholars call the Covenant Code. Code here does not mean a cipher by which we try to conceal information. That's not what we mean by code. Code here is a word from Latin codex, right? A law code, right? Called by modern Bible scholars the Covenant Code. And if you went to Hebrew school, you would call it Mishpatim, Covenant Code. This begins with well, it depends exactly where you start, but it has a brief section about the altar, then immediately begins with, and these are the Mishpatim. How do you translate Mishpatim? Precepts. Okay. Ela Mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. Right? These are the precepts, observances, laws, proper way of doing things that you shall set before them. That you, Moses, shall set before them. So it looks like it's God talking to Moses. And where is Moses at this moment? He's still up at the top of Mount Sinai. He hasn't come back down yet until chapter 32. So he's still up here. We're up in chapter 21. So Moses is still up at Mount Sinai, and apparently we're meant to understand this is God talking to Moses, and these are the precepts, observances, customs, proper ways of doing things that you shall set before them. Then comes a paragraph about buying a Hebrew slave, whatever that means exactly. Right? And then we work our way through a series of laws, which are, you and I would call mostly, not all, mostly you and I would say are civil laws, including the famous goring oxen. My ox gores your ox, which was the ancient equivalent of my Subaru smashes into your Chevrolet, right? Namely an automobile accident. Property damage, what lawyers call torts, or similarly, damage if I punch you in the nose. That's what the Covenant Code is about, mostly. There's some things you and I would call criminal law in there, as well as some things you and I would call ritual law or religious law, but it is for the mostly what you and I would call civil law. This goes on for several chapters. As scholars have long noted, The content of these laws, especially the civil laws part, I lost track of my sentence, is or are? I'll start that sentence over again. Right. Content is. The content of these civil laws is, thank you, is very similar to the content of the great law codes of the ancient Near East. The most famous of these is the Code of Hammurabi. I'm sure you heard about it in high school history, right? But how the Code of Hammurabi is not the first or only of these great civil law codes, the great law codes of the ancient Near East. There are a whole bunch of them. And just as the Israelite flood story seems to resemble and share many characteristics with the old Babylonian flood story, similarly, the laws of the Covenant Code seem to share many characteristics and fundamental points of connection with the great old Near Eastern law codes. Now here I need to comment on Mr. Kugel, who here is very bothered by this fact. Does this mean that the laws of the Torah don't come from God? I don't know why at this point Mr. Kugel decides to wax theologically sensitive, right? Except it's no worse, no less of a problem than everything else where we have parallels and discussions and how we understand divine revelation and so on. So I don't quite understand why he's much exercised about this, but he is. Anyway, we have here an Israelite law code which has clear points of contact, resemblance to the ancient law codes, and some modern Bible scholars have said flat out, the Israelites copied it. You know, they had Hammurabi code on the desk, and while the Israelite scribe is turning it into Hebrew. That's a recent thesis of a recent book by David Wright. Okay. To which my response would be to say is, well, the Israelites copy it, if that's the right word, or were inspired by the ancient law codes of the ancient Near East. But my response would be to say is, well, is that problematic? By whose law codes should they be inspired, if not by the codes of the ancient Near East? This for them is their culture. This is their civilization. Why are we surprised? They don't make up laws out of the blue. They didn't land here from Mars, right? They are part and parcel of the ancient Near Eastern society and civilization. So, their laws sound and look like laws of the ancient Near East. I didn't find that particularly shocking. It would be shocking if it were otherwise. Next, the key point here, just as in the flood story. Remember the flood story? Yes, we remember the flood story. Remember the flood story. Right. The Israelites take an ancient Babylonian flood story and turn it into a morality story. It's all about sin. It's all about God punishing the wicked. That's not in the Babylonian flood story, nor in any ancient flood story that we have. That's the Israelite twist on it. Turns it into a morality tale. People are wicked, God punishes them. That's what makes it Israelite. Similarly, when the Israelites take the laws of the ancient Near East, they turn them into Israelite laws. They are no longer the same as they once were. They're now something different. And here are 3 bullet points which I think discuss this point, and here I'm much indebted to a famous article by the late Moshe Greenberg. The article is called Some Postulates of Biblical Criminal Law, which he brings out these points and does so brilliantly, at least I think so. So here are these fundamental points. Or rather, how do we see Israelite society, culture, values in a law code which is otherwise indebted to the great law codes of the ancient Near East? Well, answer is we do. First, God himself is the legislator. God himself is the legislator. Elsewhere in the ancient Near East, the legislator, the legislative authority, is the king. Now the king, like Hammurabi, immediately boasts that he is a pious and faithful, loyal worshiper of whatever god at hand. True. So the king will claim that his royal authority comes from God. True. But at the end of the day, it's Hammurabi who's signing off on the law code. The authority behind the law code is Hammurabi, is the king. Whereas the Israelite law code, or I'd say broadly in the Torah, the authority behind the laws is God. In fact, as some modern Bible scholars have observed, and as far as I know they are correct, the idea that you have in the Book of Deuteronomy that the king is subservient to the law is an innovation of Israelite political thinking. The idea that even the king has to obey the law, even the king is subordinate to the law, that there is no sovereign immunity. That seems to be a product of Israelite political thinking. And that's witnessed here in this law code because God is the legislator, not the king. Or it's not Moses. Now there's an interesting footnote, interesting problem here. We get to the Book of Deuteronomy. Moses occasionally does talk in the first person singular, or often the first person singular in Deuteronomy. It's not clear whether it's God first person singular or it's Moses. But that's Deuteronomy. Here I would say there are some problematic verses in Deuteronomy which I freely acknowledge. But I think fundamentally, even in Deuteronomy, it's Moses talking on behalf of God. It's not Moses who's commanding the law, it's God. Next, there is equality before the law. One characteristic of the Code of Hammurabi is that we have different social classes suffer different penalties for the same crime. And this is a motif that you will find throughout the law codes of human civilization, from ancient till, I'm sorry to say, modern times. If you are a landowner, if you are a person of certain value, then this punishment you suffer is less than that, of course, of riffraff, lower elements in society. This is found throughout the Hammurabi law codes and other codes of the ancient Near East. Whereas in the Covenant Code of the Book of Exodus, there are no such distinctions. A criminal is a criminal is a criminal. A malefactor is a malefactor. Social class is not mentioned because it apparently is irrelevant. Now, before we start going gaga and get excited about the egalitarian quality of Israelite society, we need to immediately emphasize that, of course, this is a slave society. So let's not get too carried away by this egalitarian ideal of ancient Israelite law. Okay, we've got to acknowledge that. That's there. But as I said again, right here there is an egalitarian streak which is conspicuously absent in the other great ancient law codes of the ancient Near East, and is conspicuously found in these laws, both of the Covenant Code and indeed generally in the Torah. And that brings us to perhaps one of the most famous, or should I say it, infamous laws in the Covenant Code, called the Lex Talionis, which is Latin for law of retaliation. Right? In the Latin word talion, you can see the English word retaliation. It's the same root, same word. Right? In which the lawgiver says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. A hand for a hand, and a hand for a hand, or a foot for a foot, or perhaps leg for a leg. A burn for a burn, a blow for a blow, or a wound for a wound. That's the fullest version of it in Exodus 21. This law, so-called law of talion, or law of retaliation, is often cited as evidence for the cruelty, barbarism, I don't know, pick some other not nice words, right, about the ancient biblical law, right? And we need to wait for moral progress to get beyond the law of eye for an eye. To which I would say, well, all right, maybe, but you got to understand again what this law comes to include and what this law comes to exclude. That human society can progress beyond eye for an eye, I freely acknowledge, but we need to acknowledge that within its context, an eye for an eye was indeed progressive. It was not cruel at all. Because what an eye for an eye means in context, I think, is that there is to be fair and just compensation for injury. So an eye for an eye means an eye for an eye, not two eyes for an eye. Or not an eye and an ear. Or not an eye, an ear, and a neck for an eye. Arguing that there is to be fair compensation. Similarly, the idea that I damage you, I cause you harm, in reply you cause me harm, can be progressive if the alternative is I cause you harm and you kill my children. If that's the alternative, then I would say eye for an eye is pretty damn progressive. There's a lovely note on this point in the JSB on 2131, right, where the scripture has an odd verse about the goring ox, where the scripture adds the line about the goring ox, and it says, "Ben yigach o bat yigach kamishpat hazeh ye'aseh lo," right? And if the goring ox strikes a son or a daughter, the same rule shall apply. Namely, that we kill the ox. If you look at the note in the JSB, why does Scripture add this mysterious line? Doesn't matter if the ox kills a person, previous sentence, or whether it hits a son or a daughter. Because in the law of Hammurabi, if my ox kills your son or daughter, you get to kill my son or daughter. So the Israelite law comes to say, no, we don't do that. So before we dismiss eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth as a sign of Israelite cruelty, barbarism, etc., 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 which we have to wait around for human progress, I would say, in context, this is progress. Because it all depends, the question is, compared to what, compared to whom, in what context? And within that context, I think eye for an eye is perfectly progressive. We're on a trajectory here. By the time we get to the rabbis, many centuries down the road, the rabbis will argue that eye for an eye means money for an eye, what we're familiar with, i.e. torts. If I punch you in the nose and cause you damage, then I have to pay. We assess damage. That's what the rabbis say is what the passage really means. And here I have to admit, I'm not sure the passage really means money for an eye, but I acknowledge what the rabbis are trying to say is that the passage means fair compensation. And by that criterion, eye for an eye is indeed progressive, or indeed is not unreasonable. So check the syllabus before Wednesday's class, because there probably will be major changes. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday.
Okay. We seem to have lost. Did we lose Penny? Oh, there they are.
He's given us a lot to think about tonight.
So are there any thoughts? Before, if you're interested, the thing he mentioned right at the end, you can find that starting on page 154. of your Jewish study Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Yeah. And the second version of the tablet starts on 188.
So
he kind of.
I thought his point at the end was interesting that while we would think eye for an eye is rather regressive compared to other rules of the time, it might actually be progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was odd. I never thought of it that way, as being progressive.
Something that impressed me was that in Israelite law, say the king is not above the law.
Right.
He's responsible for the law. And also that the socially elite are just as subject to the law as lesser people, should not be punished more severely. And I think those are things we're still struggling with in society today. If you look at our court system and our legal system and so forth, we don't always have that straight.
Yeah. I think as you go into later chapters, when you read about the kings and then the prophets, I think sometimes you even get the impression they're held to higher standards.
Okay.
Because usually the prophets leveled their heaviest condemnations at the leaders of the people who they thought, at least that's my sort of sense of what I remember. But you typically don't hear them condemning shepherds for, behaving badly, with their sheep, but they're typically condemning, the kings or the priests who misled the people.
It was interesting at the end too, how he started talking about instead of an eye for an eye, going to compensation, he called it, instead of just money. And so compensation could be something other than money, but he didn't really get into what those thoughts were.
Yeah. You get a little bit of that in the text where they talk about, let's see, where is it here? I think there's something about if one animal damages another, you get to keep the animal or something. So.
Yeah, it's the last paragraph.
Verse 30. What didn't he say? Verse 30? Or maybe I'm in the wrong one.
But he also uses the phrase fair compensation. Whereas in today's laws, some of what people give for retribution is ridiculous. It's so far out there, the millions of dollars they receive to be compensated, whereas Jewish law, it is fair compensation.
Well, I guess that begs the question of what is fair.
True, but
there's verse 35, 21:35 says something about when a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
It dies. They shall sell the live ox and divide its price. They shall also divide the dead animal.
Verse 36 is interesting, though. Is that if, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner has failed to guard it, he must restore ox for ox, but shall keep the dead animal.
Yeah. Compensation.
So the that's it gets fairly detailed, and I think going back to Dale's point, I think they do try to establish some notion of at least what they thought would be fair. I mean, the problem is that fair is in the eye of the beholder. I guess it depends whose ox is being gored, as they say.
Is this really to prevent things from going on generation to generation? Revenging things for your father or your grandfather, and the whole point is, settle this and call it done, and don't bring it on to the next generation.
I think that's a good point. I don't know if there was explicitly a reason, but
yeah, I think that's a good point, Penny, too. Stop feuds, but
Yeah,
put an end to the event.
And clans that were enemies over generations, and this whole, because as he says, it goes on and on and on. 600 commandments to, so that okay, these are the rules. You follow the rules and don't carry on revenge and grudges and misdoings generation to generation to generation. It just occurred to me that might have been common,
probably.
And that's what they were addressing, or at least attempting to anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point, because actually in, let's see what I'm looking for right now, there's a footnote here where they talk to, because they do this, these are tribal societies which lack strong central authority. So I think that one of the things that, going back to your point, I think one of the things a laws like this does is that it does keep this from turning into, different tribes, going to war with each other forever.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like they have these 600 plus commandments to it, so they're trying to cover everything they can think of that might happen. Yeah. And it's just like there's no end to it. Like he mentioned, well, what about today? Now your Subaru damages my Subaru. Hey, that's not in these commandments. Do they make another one? I mean, so it shows how hard it is to come up with laws to cover everything.
And to interpret them the way you want it to be.
Yeah.
And you make up, you can have rules, and then immediately there's going to be some exception to some rule or some mitigation.
This is why we have lawyers.
That's right.
Yeah, because
my granddaughter wants to go to law school. I'll let her know.
There you go.
Just know all about oxes and sheep and a few other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I guess I don't find it particularly troublesome or troubled that I'm like him. I don't find it troublesome that these laws were similar to what you would find elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Although I did think he find a good distinction that in the ancient Near, for instance, the Code of Hammurabi, basically Hammurabi, promulgated the code and it's clear. Whereas it's clear in these that these laws come with, God's sanction.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we know where the Hammurabi Code originated from?
Hammurabi.
Babylon.
He didn't make them all up. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he set it down.
He collected them
in order to have his people, have laws.
Yeah.
But of course, he was above it all.
Yeah.
Worked for him.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would be interesting, I find, to compare these laws to other older religions out there, like the Hindu religion was around for that time. Do they have similar things? Where did it come from?
Buddhism, likewise. Yeah.
It's a good question. Let's look. I know some of the basic things, love your neighbor as yourself. You find similar thoughts, expressions in other religions.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether they get the sort of the granular detail. He did point out that most societies, regardless of their religion, murder is a bad idea, and generally property is protected and so on. So,
yeah.
I think it was an excellent session. He brought up so many things to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I'm going to say good night, folks.
Okay. Good night, Dale.
Good night, Dale.
Bye.
See you Friday. So are there any other thoughts on any of the stuff we've heard so far?
Good.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that the Decalogue, sometimes the way that it's described is that it's really based on your relations with other people. All of it comes down to that. That was one description I heard once.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the movie would have had the same impact if it was called the 10 Decalogues.
The 10 words. Yeah.
I don't know.
Or the 613.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even that, it's you could go down that rabbit hole and never come back up if you started counting rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder whether when you talk about the 10 words, whether that, all I can think of is John 1, the words was with God at the beginning. I'm just quoting it, but word in Hebrew, it means a whole lot more than it does in English.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole notion of word, I mean, because if you go back to even in Genesis, the first creation story, God created the world through speech. God spoke and it happened. So if you say the word, when you talk about the 10 words, if it's God's speech, then that's just like what you just said. It carries more baggage than if it's just 10 words.
Yeah, it's not just a word. It's knowledge, power,
right,
inspiration, revelation. Go on and on and on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. What do you think, Mayor?
Penny's right on.
John 1 is my favorite verse. It's easy to remember.
That was a Texas Sunday too. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Of course, they were in Hebrew, but I guess then what you compare them is because just want to check something here. Let's see. Yeah, because in the Exodus version especially, that is the one where the Sabbath commandment is based on creation. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. So the focus on the Exodus text is on creation. So.
I know that Rudy is waiting for me in order to have supper, so I think
goodness.
Going to say good night.
Okay, yeah. Give him my regards and apologies. So,
I kept him waiting.
So, okay. One thing I want to do before next week is, if you get a chance, if you do have the JSP, is the footnotes in both Exodus and Deuteronomy have some good information that we've been talking about. So that might be helpful. So I wanted to commend that to you. So with that.
Which footnote are you talking about?
All of them? All the footnotes?
No, just for under chapter 20 in the Exodus and under chapter 5 in Deuteronomy.
Oh,
just there.
Okay.
Yeah. The one in Deuteronomy is the one I mentioned. It has the table that actually shows you in the footnote, which traditions, how they count the commandments.
Right. Okay.
Which is kind of interesting. Kind of an interesting one, by the way. So, okay.
Yeah.
Helen, I don't know that you have those notes, so I will send those to you.
Okay.
Which notes?
The ones I just mentioned for exit, because those are in the JSB, and I don't know if you have that edition.
Yeah, I just got this one, so it very well could be a different edition.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will. I'll get those to you.
Okay.
One way or another.
Okay.
Are you going to be there Friday?
I'm planning on it, but I also hear we're supposed to get snow. We might. It depends which.
It's the Northeast.
Or
You're always
how
going to hear we're
close
going to
the
get.
system gets to us.
I got a spare book I can give you, so I'll get it to you Friday.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night, Carol. Good night, man.
Good night, Donnie.
Hey. Thanks, Mitch. This was good.
You're welcome, Dave. Tell Suzanne I said hi.
Okay, well.
Night, Penny.